Ever feel like your business only grows if you work harder? That's the trap so many founders fall into, especially in professional services. But what if there was a better way? I recently discovered a guide that completely reframes how to think about growth and freedom in business, and I'm looking forward to digging in. This is Freeing the Founder. Okay, I've been really looking forward to this conversation because not too long ago, I did not know who Jeremy was. And so, Jeremy, my pleasure to meet you. And as our story goes, our introductory story goes, is that we found each other on LinkedIn. Eventually, we got talking. You shared me a fantastic resource. And that is a guide that you wrote that is called The Guide to Growing Professional Services, which is a plain spoken playbook for founders who want to, build real scale and services businesses. And so, I think it was over the July long weekend. I sat down, I reviewed it, and I says, wow, I was blown away. And I'm so excited to dig deeper with you. So, first off, thank you so much for sharing that over. And before we dive in, Jeremy, I'll toss it over to you for a quick intro. And I'd love to hear your origin story, how you got to this point.
Great to be here. Thank you so much. So I started in this more from the operations side rather than the investment side, which is where I am today. I was managing director at a family office in Canada. I had the privilege of working with partners as we scaled up the business to 75 people eventually. And we basically in 2023 decided that it was time to go start something else. And it was actually before I kicked off Sidecar Capital Partners, which is what I do today, which maybe we'll speak about a bit later. I wanted to sit down and take some time to reflect on scaling professional service businesses, which I know is something that you and I really hit it off on. And the result of that reflection was the guide that I sent you and the ongoing learning that's coming from that.
And I think part and parcel is sidecar capital. And so, please, what is the problem you're aiming to solve? Because I think that goes hand in hand.
Cyber Capital Partners solves the problem of the lack of growth equity and support that's available for small service businesses in Canada. So I think if you're a tech business that's doing $5 to $10 million in annual revenue, you'll probably have a long lineup of folks who are there to support your journey, whether that's through capital or advice or services, really roll up their sleeves and help founders or family businesses or people who came into the CEO role build enduring companies. But what I found, and as I've done this more and more, what I've heard from so many business leaders is that if you're running a service business, um, there isn't a lot of support out there. And I know that this is something which is very important to you as well. As it is to me, I wanted to be in a position where I could really help these people who I care about deeply reach their goals by, in some cases, partnering with them, investing in their companies, in many cases, providing pure advisory and support services to them and helping them on that journey.
I love that you positioned it that way because you're bang on. This is the founder is a personality and a persona you and I both care about. And what I appreciate about you and your experience, Jeremy, is you've been on both sides of the fences, and so you
Yes.
totally understand. And so you just answered what was going to be my first question: is why did you create this guide? But let's dig deeper. What's missing? And what's broken within professional services that you wanted to so much help the founder to better set them up for success?
It's worth taking a step back to really contemplate what's different about professional services in the first place. So why is it that there's a different type of support system that folks who are running professional services require compared to just any other type of small business out there? Um, the first is that these businesses are people powered to the highest degree. It's human capital, it's processes, it's systems coming together. So the act of trying to turn that into something which is worth more than the sum of its parts is different than it is for a manufacturing business or a software business, or even many other types of service businesses that aren't professional services, which is an area where I do support companies as well quite actively. So that's the first thing. There's a unique need for professional service businesses that I believe, and I think that you and I would agree on this. It's different. There's something different about it. The second is that a lot of these businesses have a history where the founder is the practitioner, and that's maybe how the business started. And there's this process of transitioning from the practitioner to the manager, or the practitioner to the orchestrator. And that is particularly strong in a professional services context, where you have a lot of founders who were elite level practitioners. Sometimes they find themselves in a situation, despite their own best efforts, running pretty big companies. So because of those two things, and I would say the third one, which is the general lack of support that's available for small service businesses in the country, small being anything less than $20 million in top line. Um, it's there's a need on the one hand for specific tailor-made support for this group because of the unique natures of the business, and then a gap. And that gap stems, I think, from a couple of different reasons. But the main one is, if someone's in the investing space or if someone's in the advisory space, they often, if they're successful, they want to go up market. They want to go, once they've been successful for smaller businesses, they find it more lucrative over time to go to larger businesses and serve those businesses instead. So the result is that most of the folks, find that when they're in that situation, they want to go out and get support to help build an enduring company. It can be a challenge. It can be a big challenge to find the people who are there to support them. I think that's changing. I think in the last few years, that's changed in a massive way. Folks like yourself. I know we're both a fan of Greg Alexander and the amazing organization that he's created. So there's an increasing amount of resources out there, but it's still early.
I love that you positioned it that way because that is a perspective that I personally deeply, deeply appreciate. And my mind goes to the book, The E-Myth. I imagine you've read that too. But when you use the word technician, that's precisely it. Is how many founders, so many, if not all, can relate to the origin story of I got started because I love doing this and I wanted to provide it to the market. And then eventually, as your business grows and you develop a loyal fan base, a clientele base, you hit an invisible ceiling and you say, ouch, now I got to do all these other things. I got to worry about finance and payroll. I have to be a good manager, da, 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 da. And so anyhow, totally respect what you're saying there. I know that in our conversations back and forth, I know that you're also mentioned the idea of growth frameworks falling short for professional services. Could you? I think you're probably touching on this, but if you could elaborate on that, Jeremy, I think that would be interesting.
You look at many growth frameworks out there, or at least when I have historically, you see a lot of things that make a lot of sense on paper and in theory. And as a practitioner, as an operator of a professional service business, it doesn't take you very long to realize that they make absolutely no sense at all. So, for instance, the idea of geographic expansion, which is something that for many types of service businesses and almost all types of software businesses, a growth playbook will be agnostic to borders in a way that, as a professional service business, might not always make sense. If someone's going to do geographic expansion, but they're selling expertise, not a product, then it's not a question of supply chains and things like that. Sometimes it's a question of, can we find the right local person? Do we have enough local knowledge? If we don't, how can we go get it? Should we go acquire an existing local professional service business, or should we go try to build it out ourselves? Can we have the talent strategy that's going to support it? It's a different set of questions. And I think that geographic expansion is just one example of many things that you can be talking about: sales, you can be talking about marketing, you can be talking about operations. So that is something that comes up quite a bit. I think the other one in a professional service context, and this is to an extent true of all businesses, but I think it's especially true in the professional service space, is the the line between service and sales and marketing is blurry. It's much blurrier than it is in a lot of other businesses. The people who are providing the services, the practitioners themselves, are in many cases expected to go out and find business, for example. Or you might have a greater emphasis on referral based go to market, where the person who is the trusted professional to the client is asking for the referral, is providing the level of service that makes the person willing to provide a referral. These are all unique attributes in a professional service context, which, if someone is serious about growing an enduring company, they can't be left out of their growth playbook.
And that's why I think it is important. And I know you mentioned it earlier to have resources. And I mean, you and I have connected about this before. I mean, the work that I do with founders, with professional services firms, is to educate them and help them overcome the very challenges that you're mentioning, so that there is that cohesion. And if I were to think back to the guide that you had so well written, there were three hidden constraints, and I love how you positioned them. I'd love to ask you to just elaborate quickly on those three areas. If I recall correctly, there was a two market balance, there was a misalignment with the advice and compensation, and then there's this guild mindset that I was really intrigued by how you positioned that. So why don't I just toss back to you, Jeremy, those three hidden constraints, if you could elaborate for our listeners and viewers.
These are all constraints which I fell for as someone who was trying to build a business for well over a decade. And when I reflected back on some of the mistakes that I made and some of the successes that my partners and I had navigating them, a lot of them came down to these three areas that you just mentioned. So maybe we'll take each of those one at a time. So two
Please.
market balance. Um, this is a very well established concept in a lot of the literature around professional service business. It goes back to uh, David Maester's book, which I know is one that you and I spoke about. Um, and in the guide, I tried to elaborate on that and maybe update it to an extent for what's required in 2025. But the two market balance, in a nutshell, is you have two markets as a leader of a professional service business. You have the market for clients and you have the market for talent. And like we were talking about before, the nature of what professional service businesses do makes these two markets kind of in tension or in, that they need to be balanced to an extent. For example, if you're going to um, do exactly what clients want, providing the highest level of service, providing the greatest professionals, the biggest talent, paying them accordingly, and that's going to deliver, exactly what the clients want. And you're not willing to compromise on anything else in that business, right? That's like your number one thing is just delighting the clients. You can end up in a situation where all of the profit is going to the employees and virtually none of it is going to the owners of the business. That's an example of when the two market balance is out of whack. You can also have it the other way, where if someone who owns a professional service business is prioritizing profit too much and they're not willing to share that economics with the employees, that it can limit the expertise and the talent that you're able to attract into the organization. So that's the two market balance. It's this unique dynamic of professional service businesses where those two things need to be nailed.
I totally agree. And I remember it wasn't too long ago, many, many years ago, when I was in a different role in a company that was achieving scale and did achieve scale. I was a firm believer in the statement of, we have two clients, the one that pays us and the one that we pay. And you summarized it very, very succinctly, and you have to balance the two.
Yes. Okay. So the second one is acid, right? The advice compensation incentive dilemma. How do you compensate advice? Is it flat fee? Is it success based? Is it a commission? In all of these cases, you do run into certain conflicts, certain tensions. Um, you know, someone who's in a professional service context in particular, it's not like a product where you can sell it, have a target gross margin, and you have a market price for that thing because there's a certain SKU around it. Um, and even for high end products, they are looking at input costs and targeting gross margins, even if they're not commoditized products. Advice is a lot different. It's very different than that. Advice is something that's intangible. It's heterogeneous every single time. You can provide the same type of advice, but it's very rare that you're going to provide the same advice twice. How do you price that? How do you charge for that? What do you do? So that's the second barrier to scaling, which is
And if
this
I
challenge.
could,
Go ahead. Yeah.
if I could, Jeremy, I love this. I love this challenge, and I love for you to elaborate on it because I remember when I was reading your guide, you had some really nice examples, and if I recall correctly, you had pulled one example for a realtor versus, say, somebody who was a lawyer on a retainer fee. Could you draw from two examples just so that we have two real life or semi real life experiences to draw from?
Sure. Well, there's one very live example today, which is time-based fees in the age of AI, which is becoming much more complicated. So historically, there's a lot of businesses that charge based on time, law firms, certain accounting firms, certain tax specialization.
Yeah.
And what happens when there's the introduction of a new technology that dramatically increases the productivity per hour? Should the price go down? Well, the value didn't go down. If anything, the value went up. And being able to provide something same day as opposed to next week is actually more valuable, not less valuable. So that's an example of something where we experience this tension. Time-based fees is one. The real estate brokerage example is another one that you mentioned where it's commission-based. Is the incentive to have the um, the best price for the seller? Is the incentive to find the balance between finding the best price but quick enough that you can actually collect that commission? Right? These are all things that people in the industry know because they've lived it. Um, and when you trace it back to why so many professional service businesses struggle to scale, this is one of the reasons. It's not getting this um, advice compensation done well.
Yeah, and if I could double click and double down on a nugget that you had just shared is you raised the point about technology and AI. What I think I heard you say, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is AI and technologies can be used and leveraged as an enabler for you to do more, sustain, if not improve that level of value without necessarily increasing or decreasing your fees. Did I get that correctly?
If you have the right pricing model. I think the folks that are really married to the time-based fee, and this is something we've both seen, is it's a big struggle in the age of AI becoming increasingly a struggle. The value of what you're providing is staying the same or increasing. Um, and yet, if you're still stuck on the same time-based fee model, your revenue is going to go down. Um, and that's not a great matchup, especially when someone already has a scaled firm and they need to pay their employees. It's not like that cost is going away unless they start reducing headcount.
A very sobering, very tangible, actionable takeaway is if you're on uh, hourly billings, it may be time to evolve. So thank you, Jeremy, for letting me elaborate there. I'll toss back to you for the third constraint.
The third one is the guild mindset. This one is one that I have been as guilty of as anybody in the world. As someone who is in professional services, it's natural to want to lean into what you learned. And it takes a long time to become a practitioner. You think of doctors might be going to school for a decade, uh, especially if they're specializing. You think of architects, engineers. There's a lot of well-earned pride in the profession. The challenge is that clients do not particularly care about the intricacies of any given subject matter. they care and they're willing to pay for their problems to be solved. And one of the observations that I had, and I fell into this trap myself, is the man with the hammer syndrome, which is to the man with a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. My hammer uh, was investment advice, and I had to learn that uh, the nail was not necessarily in line with investment advice. And what we did, and what I think a lot of successful firms do as they scale, is they start to bring in practitioners from other disciplines. We had to bring in people who are experienced in governance. We had to bring in people who are experienced in financial administration and CFO services, and all of these areas that were uncomfortable to me because I didn't understand them. And I certainly didn't know how to do them. So I had to hire people who were outside of what I knew how to do myself for the first time. Um, but the benefit of that is that when it came to the client problems, we could really solve them because now we had multiple disciplines that we were applying to it. So the guild mindset is the trap that many professional service business owners get into, which is prioritizing the subject matter that they are an expert in, as opposed to working backwards from solving the client problems. And maybe if we talk about solutions later on, that's one of the things that really needs to be weeded out of many organizations if they're going to scale up.
Perfect segue, but quick comment. I loved how you positioned well-earned pride. I was having this conversation just earlier this week with another founder, and we were talking about the guild mindset of how do you escape that trap. And the idea I shared is, could it very well be that we're all par for course, that because we are professional services in nature, we're naturally going to start in delivering that service because we're experts in it. And eventually we have to evolve to becoming a better manager, a better owner, and make that distinction and crossover. Otherwise, you will forever be stuck in artisan. So with that, yes, absolutely. Let's transition into solution, because you've built this guide, you've built this playbook. What is the solution?
Well, the first solution at a high level is, Randall, exactly what you help business leaders with. Because the one mindset shift that enables a solution to all three of these is to work on the business rather than in the business, is to have that perspective as someone, that mental shift that happens when someone says, I'm going to grow this business as the orchestrator, as the person who can really um, be a leader of practitioners rather than a practitioner myself. This is a massive journey for people. Having outside support, a peer network, really as many resources as someone can possibly have to navigate that journey is crucial, because it's not just a business journey; it's a personal journey. It's an identity that evolves throughout it, and I think that the folks who do that really well, they navigate the personal journey and the professional journey. It helps with all three of these barriers. Maybe I'll speak to each of those because I know you asked about them.
Please.
It speaks to uh, the first one of the two market balance really well. Someone who has that perspective as someone who is working on the business and thinking in systems, they are going to naturally start to see a trade off and start to balance that trade off better, right? Between the market for clients and the market for talent. They might start to do all sorts of things that I've seen be incredibly helpful. One of which is leaning into technology and systems as a way to make the practitioners who are in the business more productive and more valuable to clients than they would be if they went out on their own. And, it doesn't necessarily matter that someone who is a founder of a professional service business uh, doesn't use those things in their own life and is able to delight clients. What matters is that they are able to create the structure and the systems around the practitioners who work in their business to make them more productive. And that does relate back to working on the business rather than in the business. I would say on it also helps with the advice, compensation, and incentive dilemma. Starting to think about what pricing model, what fee model makes sense for us and our unique business. Does it make sense to start segmenting our client base, defining our ICP better, finding different service lines and different service offerings within what we do to optimize the pricing, to increase margin, to drive more sustainability and even the duration of that revenue. And to do that in a way that doesn't create a conflict of interest with clients, it doesn't rub them the wrong way. Founders are beautifully positioned to navigate that. Many times, they're the people who know the clients the best and really have their finger on the pulse of um, of what makes sense. Having outside support for that is definitely helpful because it requires analysis. It might require a little bit of an outside perspective. So then the founder who understands the business the best and the clients the best can go in and make the decisions that really matter. And on the third one, which is the guild mindset, it's the founders again who extricate themselves from being the chief cook and bottle washer and everything in between, who are thinking about the business as a whole, who are then able to most clearly see client problems from the client perspective rather than subject matter intricacies from the practitioner perspective, and um, and bring to bear perhaps more expertise, perhaps not. Maybe it's not more expertise from other types of practitioners, but maybe it's tweaking what you do to solve the client problems at a fundamental level. Sometimes it's just digging deeper into your given subject matter expertise and making sure that whatever you're doing is solving the underlying client problem. I find that people who do that naturally expand revenue, whether it's through new accounts or increasing the amount of revenue they get per account without necessarily even increasing the pricing, which is very powerful.
This is interesting. There's a couple key themes that I'm hearing here is how do you find a way where you can maintain, if not enhance, your value? How do you find a way where you can decouple the founder from delivering the services? How do you find a way where you're moving away from hourly billings? And the thought that crossed my mind is in your guide, there's a section focused on advice around bundling and packaging and productizing. And that strikes me as a very tactical, but also very strategic way of really checking the box on all three. So if you could, you're nodding your head, so it sounds like you would agree with that.
100%. I think one unifying theme of folks that get out of the guild mindset is they sell solutions, not services. What does that mean? So a service is, call it a weekly, uh, let's say it's a not a professional service. We can take it out of that context for a second. Let's say it's a pest control business. So a service would be like a weekly inspection. But is that a solution? Not really. The client doesn't want an inspection. They want to make sure that the area is bug free. So what a solution might do is it might bundle several services. It might bundle a weekly inspection. It might bundle an annual audit. It might bundle, uh, a very short-term response to issues when they arise, and then a follow-up to make sure that whatever underlying issues those got resolved. And offering that as a solution, offering that as a bundled service to their clients. And you see this in professional services all the time. It's the folks who, the consulting firms that position what they do as a comprehensive solution that maybe includes multiple subject matters, it's multidisciplinary in many cases. And being able to take that solution, go to a client and say, here's the problem that you expressed to me. We have this bundle of services that is perfectly geared towards solving that. Um, that can help with marketing, sales, service, and everything, ops, really all aspects of the business. And we also find is those companies that sell solutions and non-services, their average revenue per client is dramatically higher. Their average revenue per employee is dramatically higher. Their pipeline's more full. It's all the things that people want but have a hard time getting to. You mentioned a couple of other ones as well. Productized services. So having services that are pre-priced in many cases, that have a clearly defined list of what's included and what's not. One of the examples I gave, which you see more and more, is professional service firms having that right on their website, and people can procure it asynchronously. This isn't necessarily something that all professional services should embrace, but many of them should. I mean, there's a lot of friction that goes out the window with that type of thing. And then the third one you mentioned was asset-based consulting, which has a lot to do with, you know, the historically the world of service and the world of software were two different worlds, and they've converged in so many ways, especially now with AI, but even beforehand. And what folks who do with asset-based consulting is they're creating tools, software tools that provide elements of what they do as professional service businesses, and they sell them. They sell access to them. Clients have their data on their systems. Clients are paying them a recurring fee. There's a very comprehensive onboarding in many cases. You often see that these asset-based consulting products become mission critical for their clients. Not only that, but they also become very valuable for the practitioners. The practitioners are using themselves to manage projects, to manage service delivery. So these are all different ways that folks have been able to get out of the guild mindset. Think about solving client problems from a fundamental perspective, and grow revenue and build enduring businesses along the way.
Great advice. And I know that this is not, I know that this concept is not new, but it's one that a lot of founders are challenged with, and rightly so, because if you perfect this, then you really truly are ready for scale, and you really potentially may be ready for some gasoline. And so I'm watching the clock. I feel like I could talk to you for another 2 hours, Jeremy, because this is all gold. But I want to respect your time. I want to move to a close with this final topic, and that is scaling. And how do you know when you're ready for that extra pour or extra ounce of gasoline? Because I mean, let's face it. You look online, you look on YouTube. There's just so many gurus these days, and there's a lot of talk about how do I grow, how do I scale, how do I exit. But before I exit, how do I pour some money into it? And so let's talk about finding a funding partner. When is the right time, and how do you know that it's the right timing for you?
So I want to answer the funding partner part, but before that, can I turn it back over to you and just ask you, as you work with leaders of professional service businesses, how do you assess when they are ready to scale? And what are the types of things that you've seen, um, both on the yes, this person is ready side, and also sometimes on the maybe they're not, or the business isn't?
Yeah, two parts. I'll answer that really simply. If the founder steps away for 6 months or a year, does the business operate? And secondly, if and when they do that, can the business operate sustainably so that the profits are sustained? And if those two check boxes are not checked off, then the answer is you're not ready.
Right. That's a big lift for a lot of people. There's a lot that goes into that, being able to take 6 to 12 months out.
Absolutely. And you're bang on. And it's I don't know if control is the right word, but certainly there's a lot of apprehension, there's a lot of anxiety because there's a lot of what ifs. But until you do it, you really aren't battle tested.
Yes. Yeah, 100%. So let's say that someone is considering taking on capital, right? So some of the things that we would look for is, first of all, um, do they have a need for the capital? This is a big one. What are they going to use it for? How is it going to create more value in the business? Do they need more working capital? There's a myth out there that service businesses aren't capital intensive. I couldn't disagree more from what I've seen, because anybody who's had the situation where they're paying their employees every 2 weeks, but they have receivables outstanding for 45 days because they're getting paid afterwards, knows that there's working capital that's required to do that. And they know that every time they bring on more clients and every time that they bring on new employees to serve those clients, that mismatch just grows and grows. So in some cases, you can fix that with payment terms. And I wrote another guide to managing working capital in service businesses for folks who want to. We can actually add that if you want in the show
Yeah.
notes, or anything like that. But
Love that.
um, there are things that people can do without raising capital, but sometimes uh, they do need to raise more capital for that. There's more demand than they can possibly meet with internal funding. We've looked at taking on debt. We don't want to do that. We've looked at funding from operations. It's really not sufficient in order to get there. It makes sense to take on some equity funding. The second big one, and I think this is especially important in a professional service context, is, do we see the value beyond the capital? Is the other person who's coming in going to be a partner who can actually help us scale? Do they understand how we're different, why we're different, why we win? Um, are they willing to let me, as the business leader, if I'm going to take on a partner, are they still willing to let me run the show? Or are they going to start trying to make all sorts of decisions that I don't agree with? That's one massive thing for many professional service business owners. And I think the third one, in terms of readiness and also fit, is a lot of things that we talked about on this call. Is like, do I actually want to do what's needed in order to scale this company? There is no shame in saying no to that. The only mistake that people make is thinking that they want to and then not being willing to do what's necessary to get there. And so being able to see clear-mindedly the inputs, all the things that need to get done in order to get there, and then an unbelievable willingness to push through and get to the other side. Those three things, I think, set people up for capital readiness and also success afterwards.
Just because you can doesn't mean you should. So I love how you positioned it. And I love that you mentioned that it's a two-way street because it really is. And so my parting thought in our conversation is, if you're wanting to scale and eventually find a funding partner, start the conversation early, because that two-way conversation needs to start as soon as possible, because it is a partnership for all the reasons that Jeremy, you had mentioned. And so, Jeremy, thank you so much for this conversation. I would dare say, let's do a number two in a couple months. Let's do another one of these if you're game. And
I'm
for the
game.
listeners, excellent. For the listeners and viewers, what's the best way to connect with you?
Best way to connect with me is LinkedIn. So you can look me up, Jeremy Rosmarin on LinkedIn. Sidecar Capital Partners website. We have our contact there. And I'd love to hear from anybody out there who's thinking about scaling their professional service business. Even if you're not ready for capital, we can talk about the article, some thoughts. I offer a free 45-minute consultation for any small business owner in the country. It's one of my favorite things to do. It's really my pleasure. And we just focus on solving whatever is most salient and important for that person. No pitch, nothing. So I would love to speak with you. And also, before we wrap, Brandon, I just want to say, on behalf of the community of folks who are working alongside people who are professional service leaders trying to grow great businesses, I love what you're doing. I love this initiative. I think it's important socially, it's important for the country. So thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you.
Of that perspective. Thank you so much. And wealth of knowledge in this conversation, but I'm not surprised because, as I mentioned earlier, You have been on both sides of the fence. Thank you, my friend.
Awesome. Great to see you.